This show is part of the Proclaim Podcast Network, thoughtfully crafted, faithfully told stories that proclaim His name. More at proclaim.fm.
Hey y'all, it's me again. Which, of course, it's me, right? You clicked on a Compelled episode. I'm not even sure why I say that it's me, because you obviously know that it's me, but let's put all of that aside, all right? I'm recording an update tonight on Sunday, November 16th, 2025. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. and fly out to Greenville, South Carolina to interview a very special couple who I've been trying to interview for the last 4 years. In fact, it's a little bit surreal that this moment is finally going to happen. Their story is going to be a surprise, but it is truly out of this world, literally, and I cannot wait to share it with you. And for those who are curious, I normally batch record all of my interviews one time a year because it's more cost effective that way. I'll travel to a city and record 15 to 20 interviews in a single week in a pop-up recording studio that we'll set up in a host church. But it just so happens that I was already going to come to Greenville for a ministry retreat this week, so the timing for this one-off interview was perfect. We've already recorded 18 new testimonies and have already begun editing several of those. In fact, here's a sneak peek of just a few of those. Will struggled with his sexuality while growing up, but finally he made a decision to live as a transgender woman named Maggie and never look back, which he did successfully for 30 years, deceiving everyone he knew. But then one day he encountered the true God of the Bible, who asked him, "Who does God say Will is?" Brittany was young and successful, and her party friends nicknamed her Blackout Brittany. Then one fateful night, under the influence, she drove head-on into the wrong lane of traffic and caused a tragedy that she could never have imagined. Could God really forgive her, much less want her? Ben was the new pastor of a small church in Mississippi. He and his congregation mutually loved and cared for each other until he decided to marry a woman from another ethnicity, and his peaceful flock rebelled. What was God asking him to do? Kayla was sexually abused by a family member for almost a decade. At times, she felt worthless and powerless, incapable of changing her past, present, or future. But then one day, she was introduced to the creator of time and space. Could he redeem what had been broken and restore what had been lost? Marvin was a card-carrying American communist and atheist who couldn't wait to usher in a new era of equality and even tried to become an informant for the KGB. But then one afternoon, he sat frozen in his chair while his brain raced unbidden. What if Vladimir Lenin was wrong about God? John was a Bhutanese convert who was persecuted for becoming a Christian. He fled the country to seek relief, but ended up imprisoned in a foreign nation because he chose to share about Jesus publicly. Could his fledgling faith remain firm? And that's just 6 of the 18 interviews that we've already recorded. But we need your help to carry those across the finish line. As I'm sure you already know, about 5 weeks ago, we launched our fundraising campaign for 2026, and we're off to a great start. We have 2 goals that we want to reach before December 31st. Our first goal is to raise $80,000 to fund our work for next year. That pays for our editors, travel, audio equipment, music licensing, website hosting, podcast hosting. The list goes on and on. And actually, a huge chunk of our budget this year was paying the broadcast fees for our new nationwide radio broadcast. As of tonight, we've raised just over $10,500, which is 13% of our $80,000 goal. And we're just so grateful for that. To each listener who's contributed, let me extend my gratitude. Whether you've given $10 or $1,000, thank you for playing a part in bringing these testimonies to life. We truly would not be able to create Compelled without our listeners like you. So thank you. Our second goal is to have 300 monthly partners. And as of tonight, we have 173, which is 58% of the way there. So again, if you're one of those 173 monthly partners, thank you. Your consistent giving allows us to make long-term plans for the future while simultaneously puts food on the tables of everyone who works on Compelled. So on behalf of the entire team who works on Compelled, thank you. Compelled would not be possible without you. I want to leave you with this last email that we received from a listener. And actually, I just spoke with him on the phone a few nights ago. He writes, I was an atheist homosexual who came to Christ again. And I just needed to listen to something that was going to saturate me with the love of God. I strongly believe in the power of testimony. And after some searching through some podcasts on the podcast app, I listened to yours, and I just never stopped listening. It's amazing to hear people's encounters with Jesus, especially when they come from a place so broken. It's just so encouraging and beautiful. And, we're grateful to receive messages like those. We've got 45 days before the end of the year. And if you've been blessed listening to Compelled the same way that this listener was, would you please prayerfully consider joining us in our work? Like I said, Compelled would not exist without listeners like you. To become a monthly partner or to make a one-time gift, just visit compelledpodcast.com/donate. Again, that's compelledpodcast.com/donate. And now, on to the show.
We were to follow these Russian AGE ships, but they launched their helicopters. Now we got a helicopter buzzing us that's capable of shooting missiles at us and sinking us like that. And I thought I was gonna die.
Hi, I'm Brent from Tampa, Florida, and I'm an actuary. I enjoy listening to Compelled because I find the diverse stories of God moving powerfully in people's lives so encouraging. I even got to connect with one of the show's guests, who is doing missions work that very closely aligns with where God may be calling me in the future. Hope you enjoy today's episode.
I'm Paul Hastings, and you're listening to Compelled, where we use gripping, immersive storytelling to bring to life Christian testimonies from the kingdom of God, told by the people compelled to live for Him. In a recent episode, we heard from Catherine Zoller, who at the age of 15 was sentenced to 8 years in prison for grand theft auto, larceny, arson, truancy, and more. But when she escaped custody and started hitchhiking across the nation, she was picked up by a country pastor who would share a message with her that would transform her life. Again, you can hear that story by tuning into episode number 41 with Catherine Zoller. Today, our guest is Jim Payne. In 2005, Jim deployed to the Middle East as part of a Navy SEAL platoon, alongside 15 of his closest friends and brothers in arms. During their deployment, his team suffered devastating losses in the mountains of Afghanistan in an incident detailed in the best-selling book and hit movie, Lone Survivor. As Jim grappled with crippling grief, it was all he could do to cling to the one who offered any glimpse of hope. So gather round, lean in, and join us for another compelling story from the kingdom of God. A few years ago, I met Jim at a conference in Georgia, and when I heard part of his story, I knew right away it could make for a great Compelled interview. But alas, I didn't have my recording equipment with me. But thankfully, God worked things out, and later on, I was invited to speak at a homeschool graduation in Virginia, where I learned that Jim would be volunteering on their security team. And so, of course, I couldn't pass up the opportunity a second time. Here's a quick backstory on Jim's life growing up. He was born in 1963. His mother died when he was young, and his father remarried and then moved the family to California. Jim had a rocky relationship with his stepmom, and his father didn't express affection very well. His first meaningful exposure to Christianity was after joining his high school's football team, But to him, Christians just seemed a little bit weird. Jim wasn't sure what he wanted in life, so he joined the Navy right after graduating high school in 1981. And by 1985, he was working on a Navy salvage ship right in the middle of the Cold War. At this point, his Navy career had been relatively uneventful until one day when our story begins.
Down in the Southern Pacific, we were to follow these Russian AGE ships. They were auxiliary ships. They have helicopters on them, but they're kind of more, I would call them spy ships sometimes, but they're more auxiliary, so they're not combatant either. But they were down in an area of the Southern Pacific where the Russians kind of told everybody, hey, don't go in this particular area of the ocean because we're testing one of our missiles to impact in that area. So the U.S. government sent us out by ourselves to go out there and follow these Russian ships. We brought a few spooks on board so they can, big old long cameras, and we were videotaping them and taking pictures of them the whole time. And we were waiting for this missile to impact, and our job was to go in there and take water samples and debris, pick it up and stuff like that, see if we can get anything out of that hit. They finally shot the missile off, and it impacted the area, and we actually made it to the impact site before the Russians got there. So we were taking water samples and couldn't find any debris, but we got a whole case of concussion grenades, and we go off the bridge wing, and one of our guys was just popping, throwing it in the water, one after the other, and lighting it so they go boom, underwater, boom, And
are you trying to detonate something?
No,
there,
we're trying to mess with their sonar, tracking the sinking of it, but they launched their helicopters. 2 of them, they're buzzing us. So we're going to general quarters. That's straight up and getting ready for combat is what you're doing. Back then I was a 50 caliber gunner, one of the gunners on the bow. And we practiced shooting 50-gallon drums in the ocean, that's it. And I had another gunner over here, but our guns, they didn't cross paths. What they did is they were locked like straight ahead. So, But now we got a helicopter buzzing us that's capable of shooting missiles at us and sinking us like that. So that was kind of a crucial moment for me where I was like 21 years old. I was scared because it was buzzing us hard. I'd tell you the truth of there, all I gave was flat jackets and a steel helmet. The helicopter had a lot more, so I was scared. It was, like I said, this is not where I want to go. It's not how I want to go. I'm too young to go. And I thought I was going to die.
Jim's ship was vastly outgunned by the Russian attack helicopters. But after what seemed like an eternity, the Russians had made their point and the situation de-escalated. Now, you can imagine that at this moment, Jim had zero desire to remain in the Navy. And although he wasn't religious, he wasn't eager to discover whether or not there was an afterlife anytime soon. But even though thoughts of God weren't at the top of Jim's mind, God was already at work, planting a seed while Jim was in port in Hawaii.
When you talk about God moments, I think he addresses us in different ways. Because earlier that year, me and my buddy we were in Waikiki. And we were just your typical sailors, looking for booze and women. That's our go-to thing.
Yeah.
We're going to go party all night, but we got a hotel room so we can actually have someplace to sleep so we don't have to drive. And we heard some live music down in Waikiki outside. So we look down there and we see a bunch of people gathering in this grassy area. So we just got to check it out. And when we get down there, we sat down in the grass because everybody's sitting down enjoying the music. And then all of a sudden we looked at each other. Did he say Jesus? Yeah, it sounded like he said Jesus, in the music, the lyrics of the music.
Huh.
And then so we're like, what's going on? It was a really good contemporary rockin' music. And all of a sudden these 2 gorgeous girls sit on each side of us in the grass and start talking about Jesus. It was YWAM is what it was. And I guess we committed ourselves to Christ at that point, thinking probably that these girls liked us because of that. I don't know what.
Yeah.
But that was another seed, other than more of the seed. But that's where I think when I made that decision to stay in the Navy, I reverted a little bit back to that. It's like, because they talked us up, and says there's more to life than what we're doing,
Jim never saw those girls again, but he re-enlisted for another stint in the Navy. Sure, he had made a commitment to Christ, but it meant nothing to him. Years went by, and he kind of forgot about that entire night. Eventually, Jim was reassigned from Hawaii to Australia and then back to California. He had married a woman he had met in the Navy, but their marriage was falling apart and life was a mess. which is exactly when God began to water the seed that had been planted years before in Hawaii.
When I'd go to the base gym and work out, and there was always this guy there he was probably about 5'5". We call him a fire plug because he was just ripped. He had skull tattoos and fire flames on his arms. And I never really met him before, but we started conversations when we'd share a bench or something. And he was the Navy chaplain of the base there.
Did you know that?
I did not. So a couple of times he invited me to come on over, to the church. I said, I'm the last person you want over there right now because I'm all kinds of frazzled. Because then we started going through a divorce, but just the struggle with financially, and then a small base. Once the word got out that we were split, all the guys started hitting on her, and all the girls started hitting on me. And I don't know what it is. It's like it's a soap opera. It really turned into a soap opera.
Because y'all were both working at the same base.
Yeah, same base and same building for that matter too.
My goodness.
So a lot of things were going on, and I was struggling financially as well as everything else. And I think I had dropped about 25 pounds. It was obvious I was kind of a mess at that time. So eventually the pastor had me come over just talk to him in his office instead of going to church. And so I started counseling with him. The reason he was the tattoos and everything, he was a former Marine. He was an enlisted Marine, and the Navy chaplain corps actually takes care of the Marines as well. We started talking, and he started showing me some light, and some truth. That was another turning point for me.
Finally, during a base chapel service in 1988, Jim gave his life to Christ and fully committed to becoming a follower of Jesus.
I started going to church there on base on the chapel, but by then I'd lost my house, so I was living on base. I was living in barracks. I was still learning a lot, but I was pretty committed to what he was showing me and serving a little bit. I was with the kids ministry a little bit there. When everything started turning there, but everything at work was kind of going south on me. I had a guy come up to me in the comm stay and make some comment about my ex who works down the hall, that he's trying to hook up with her or something along those lines. And of course, I had to throw a punch, and I wasn't trying to hit him, but I went a little too far and I hit the wall and put a hole in the wall. So I had anger issues going on still there. And I was still struggling there.
Yeah.
Plus my ex was doing some things that really because she still had my last name.
Yeah.
She was doing some things that they weren't happy with either. So the command was, when they put that together with my name, even though we're not together anymore, they still think of me. So I was getting some bad reports. And so I said, I got to get out of here.
Jim transferred out of California and trained as a Navy diver. In 1993, he married his wife today, Sherry. For 10 years, Jim and Sherry continued following the Lord's plans faithfully and were active in their church and were raising 3 young children. By 2003, Jim had served in the Navy for 22 years and had risen through the ranks as a Navy diver, a corpsman, and was now a chief petty officer. Then, while he was stationed in Hawaii, an unexpected opportunity presented itself.
Once a year, we get a bunch of new chiefs that get qualified, and we kind of indoctrinate them in, or kind of, bring them in a hearty Navy, salty way, right? So anyway, we're at an event like that. It was out in Hawaii, and so after we're cleaning up, we're having a couple of beers on the picnic table, and this fellow chief comes over and sits down next to me. And we don't know each other real well, but we know each other a little bit. But he's a SEAL. He's actually told me, he said, "Hey, my name's Dan. I'm going to be the platoon chief for a new platoon that's forming up, and I'm going to be able to pick a lot of my guys." He asked if I would be committed to maybe coming in his platoon, being his platoon corpsman and diver.
And what does that mean? Like, what's the repercussions of joining a platoon?
Well, I'm in a dive platoon at this time, so it's just all divers in there. So we have a certain mission. When you go into a SEAL platoon, even an SDV platoon is a SEAL platoon, we're talking about land warfare, we're talking about helicopter operations, and we're talking about shooting, demolition. You're involved with all that. And it's all about your team, it's all about your guys.
Yeah.
So I've got 16 guys in a platoon, and back then you had 12 SEALs, at least 12 SEALs, and then you had 3 technicians, we call them. So those are the 3 guys, the electrician, and then you have usually a diver and a diving corpsman. So that's what makes up an SDV. Back then it was made up an SDV platoon.
And the corpsman, again, is like basically the medic.
Yep. Takes care of everything medical. And they're yours. That's the key, is that they're your guys. You take care of them from beginning to end, And then when you deploy, if you ever deployed in combat, potentially you could be involved in that as well, particularly as the corpsman side of the house. I think I went back that night and asked Sherry, it says, that's 2 years. 2 years of being gone a lot and doing some high-risk stuff. What do you think? And she asked me, do you want to do that? And I'd kill for that. For a corpsman, primarily too, to be able to go do something like that. So she said, yeah, she's okay with it. And so I joined a platoon, and I think we formed up in, I want to say October of 2003.
As Jim said, joining a Navy SEAL platoon was an opportunity of a lifetime. And unbeknownst to him, his entire career had actually been building up to this point. He was trained as both a Navy diver and as a special operations corpsman, which is basically a battlefield medic. And that's actually quite a rare combination. In fact, there were only about 80 sailors in the entire U.S. Navy with that same combination of skills. Not only that, Jim held some significant seniority as a chief petty officer. But despite all the training he'd had over the last 22 years, the preparation he was about to undergo next would be unlike anything else he'd ever experienced. That's coming up right after the break. Welcome back to Compelled. We've been listening to Jim Payne share about his journey of faith and also about the opportunity of a lifetime to join a Navy SEAL platoon. Now, one thing I want to clarify. Although Jim joined a Navy SEAL platoon, he is actually a Navy diver, not a SEAL. And that's an important distinction Jim wanted to stress. But even though he wasn't officially a SEAL, he was a full member of the SEAL platoon and involved in every detail of what they did and every training exercise, some of which were pretty intense.
So we start workups. So there's a cycle that every SEAL platoon goes through. So you go through MAR ops, marine operations, so rubber boat operations. And what they did is we actually launched Zodiac boats out of a helicopter on the far side over there between Molokai and Oahu. It's kind of the final mission profile after MAROP. So we get over there with 4 boats, and we're supposed to transit over to Kaneohe and making communications while we're out in the boats. And so they drop us off right at sun setting. Idea is to get over there in 6 hours. Anyway, a storm brewed up pretty bad, and our support ship that was watching us had to take off. It was getting so bad. And we call it the perfect storm because we were doing troughs like this in Zodiacs. And then we had Zodiac engines dying, and Dan was puking, and the pontoons were deflating on us out there. So we had a comedy of errors was going on.
And your support ship's gone also, which
support,
is not
it took
good.
off, yeah. So we had no comms with anybody. In fact, the guy across from me, he's probably about 6'5". He's a big guy, big SEAL. But when we were going down the trough like this, I never saw his eyes get so big as I saw him then. We had to make a choice because we couldn't make it to Kaneohe. So we made it around the south end of the island. Actually, we got closer to Honolulu. That's when the waves started to calm down a little bit for us. And
how high were those waves, you think, the troughs?
it was dark. It was black.
Oh, even worse, man.
It seemed like 20-foot drops because we were coming down so hard. Our nose would hit the trough, bottom of the trough, and it would buckle up a little bit. So there's 4 of us in each boat. And so we had kind of lean as we're going down. And we had to kind of lean the other way going up.
Wow.
I've been in a lot of boats operations, but that was a rough storm. But we still hung together, and we pulled back in probably about 3 or 4 in the morning. So it took twice as long us to get there, and had a couple of beers in the platoon space and went home.
These kinds of training activities were not untypical and show the rigor that U.S. Navy SEAL teams go through to prepare themselves for every situation. Their training, especially Jim's, would be put to the limit during another exercise, this time for land warfare. It was a defining moment for Jim and one where he would rely on his training, but ultimately have to trust the Lord.
We were doing live fire, center peel training. So it's basically when you make contact with an enemy, you essentially put lead downrange to keep its heads down, but you kind of leapfrogging back. But you're kind of crossing in the middle, back and forth, and you tap somebody on the shoulder and you move on from the fire. So we split the platoon into 2. So one was shooting at one point while the other was over the other side of the berm, reloading and kind of just resting and rehydrating. So we're taking turns back and forth. And we had a training cadre with us. They were monitoring everything and running the scenarios and stuff. And I happened to be over there on the other side of the berm, and my SEAL corpsman, who was his first day with the platoon, Marcus, we just brought him on board. He just got off deployment. he came on board, and he was his first day. He was all there with me, and all of a sudden you hear, because you hear the gunfire going off. It's very distinct sound, but the gunfire stops, and we hear medic. So our medevac plan is to jump in this dually pickup. It's got the trauma bag and the O2 and the backboard in there, and Marcus jumped in the driver's side and we punched it up this hill. So a lot of times we drill each other too. So we run drills like this all the time. But still, your adrenaline pumps when that call goes out and somebody's injured. So we get up that hill. My SEAL corpsman, he jumps out and he runs over there first, and I grab the trauma bag. So I'm right behind him. But by the time I get there, one of our guys is laying in the grass, the long grass, and Marcus had put his hand on the entrance wound and an exit wound. And at this point, I'm still thinking, this is a pretty realistic drill. This is kind of one of those things that I'm not too sure what's going on, but I'm playing it like it's real, regardless. So drop my bag. I ask him, what do you got? He's got a bullet wound here, and he's still conscious, still talking to us. So I'm doing a blood sweep. I blood sweep him. I don't find any other ricochets or wounds on him, right? So anyway, I give him a gauze. I see the real blood. I'm like, oh, we're real here. Didn't change much because, again, I had good training to continue on until I feel this heat between my legs, this searing heat. And I realized that I'm straddling this rifle barrel that's been fired a whole bunch, so it's hot. And it's on full auto, by the way. And his right hand was holding it, so I was really unsafe, and I gave it to one of the guys. But I realized he couldn't move his hand at all. He said, I tried to get him to squeeze my fingers, he wouldn't squeeze them. So I'm like, uh-oh, that's not good. So I'm checking different things, making sure I got some blood flow there, but it's not looking good at this point. And so he's holding pressure on this whole time and talking to him. So I got to get an IV in this guy. I got to get him O2 on him. We got to get him out of here. He needs to get to a trauma center ASAP. So we got him on the backboard. We were getting him in the truck. So we actually picked him up and put him in the truck. So we're driving in the back of a pickup, and he's still conscious, talking to us. We got basically a helicopter coming. And so we meet him there. We can only have two of us get on the bird with him. Actually, as we put him back in there, the IV got pulled out. So Marcus had to actually re-stick him in the air while we're in the helicopter before we got to the civilian trauma center. So essentially, we got him there. He was starting to have difficulty breathing at that point when we got him in there, the ER. And so they took him into the surgery right away. It was a defining moment because, I had to pray. That was one of those things that after you, as a medic, you want to get in there, you want to do what's right. You want to save a life. He's your guy. He survived, but he was out of the platoon, and he had several surgeries after the fact because he'd have any kind of right hand strength or dexterity. Just took several surgeries over a period of a couple of years.
It took out some nerves or something.
Well, the only thing he had going for him is that it blew out. The surgeon said when he got in there, when he came out of surgery, he said when he opened him up, he could stick his whole fist in his chest and not touch anything.
Oh, wow.
He said it was almost like Jell-O in there.
Oh, wow.
And so he said it was saving grace. He had one artery that was still intact that was feeding his arm. So they worked on that. We got something to work with here. We can actually work with. So they salvaged his arm. Poor kid. He was just 24 years old, but essentially his Navy SEAL career is over.
Yeah.
But I was with this guy. He was a believer, which I think was great because he's got a testimony beyond belief. He shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Straight up, he should not be here. And he shouldn't have any kids either because there's other things that happened, poor guy, that related to that.
But he does have kids.
Yeah. He's got three scrapping young boys. He came to my retirement ceremony, for all the way from Colorado. He lives in Colorado. I remember he brought me with a picture, a hand-drawn picture, but it was from one of his sons. And his mom helped him write it, but it was like, thank you for saving my daddy's life, that kind of thing. So so it's still kind of strong.
It was through moments like these, life and death situations, where Jim grew close to his team. Through sweat, tears, and literal blood, they all bonded with each other like brothers.
We went through some crazy stuff in that platoon before we even deployed. And so that kind of set the tone for this platoon. It was a lot of things that happened throughout it, through the training cycle, that was just like, wow. So we got tight. I heard it from senior enlisted guys already. We're unusually tight platoon. And we have our downtime. We'd play basketball or play football together. We were always doing stuff together, especially when we were away. Or when we were in town, we'd have parties at somebody's house, football, Super Bowl party. I think we went over to Dan's house once, and we helped each other move, So it was an unusually tight platoon.
Finally, in April 2005, after 17 months of preparation, the moment came they had been working towards: deployment as a Special Forces unit. Now, Navy SEAL teams can be sent anywhere around the world, but for this particular deployment, they were sent on a lengthy tour into the Middle East, which was a hotbed of danger right in the midst of America's war on terror. They knew their missions carried risk, but they had no idea that this deployment would forever mark and change their lives. More on that right after the break. Welcome back to Compelled. Jim and his 15 other teammates on the SEAL team had just been deployed to the Middle East in April 2005. They comprised SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 1, also known as SDVT-1. Once they arrived in the Middle East, half of the platoon was sent to a combat zone in Afghanistan to accompany SEAL Team 10, while the other half conducted operations closer to Qatar and the Persian Gulf. The plan was that halfway during the tour, the two halves would switch places, and so Jim's group was sent to the Persian Gulf for the first half of the tour. But just 2 months into their deployment, the other half of Jim's team, the ones that joined SEAL Team 10 in Afghanistan, became involved in a tragic mission. This mission is detailed in a popular book and movie called Lone Survivor, written by Marcus Luttrell, the only survivor from the mission. Incidentally, Marcus is also the same Navy SEAL corpsman Jim told us about earlier, who worked alongside him to save Andy's life during the training accident. This particular ill-fated mission was called Operation Red Wings.
So Operation Red Wings was insert 4 guys into the Hindu Kush. They transited for quite a while, and they were looking at this particular village for a top Taliban leader. So they were up there to kind of get eyes on if they had. 2 of the guys are snipers. Matt and Marcus were snipers. So if they had that close of a shot, they could have potentially taken him out if that was the case. So that was the whole operation. It's supposed to be go in, stay a short period of time, confirm it, and then get out kind of a thing. They went in, I think, on the 27th June. They got rolled up by some goat herders. And so they had an old guy, a younger guy, and then a young kid. Essentially, the way it happened was they decided to let him go. So they went straight down to the village and told Taliban. And so our guys were trying to get out of there at some point, but they couldn't get comms so they could get picked up. So essentially, the Taliban rallied up pretty quick and ensued a pretty ferocious firefight with our guys. As far as high ground goes, our guys lost the high ground pretty early because it was a very sheer cliff that they were working off of. During the battle, lost Danny. He got killed early. Murph got killed shortly thereafter. And again, the timelines are a little hazy, but Murph was able to call for assistance. So he had to get to an open air high ground with his satellite phone and tell him we need assistance. We're being overrun. So he was able to do that before he got killed. And then Marcus and Matt were kind of on the run still, but they were shooting RPGs at him. There was, they say, 40 to 50 Taliban against the 4 guys. They got split up at some point after an RPG hit them, and I think Marcus got knocked unconscious.
2 men were down, and 2 more were still on the run, although 1 was unconscious. The distress signal was finally heard back at the main base, and a quick response force was sent out.
There's 2 Chinooks that went out there. And normally, when you go out in a combat area, you have Cobras, attack helicopters that go with you. There was a mix-up, and so the 2 Chinooks went out by themselves.
But no Cobras at all?
No support, yeah. When the first Chinook was going to not land, but just tip off and get the guys off, Taliban, they know our tactics, and they saw the birds, and they shot an RPG into the back end of a Chinook and blew it up. 3 of my guys were on that. So we knew that happened. We were still in Iraq. So we knew the Chinook went down. We didn't know how bad or anything, but, we're praying, that they're survivors, period. There were 16 guys in there, and plus the air crew, the Army air crew. And then plus we didn't know about the details of the other guys on the mountain.
Tragically, all 16 men on the Chinook died, 8 from the U.S. Army Special Forces and 8 more Navy SEALs. It was one of the deadliest days in Navy SEAL history. Jim and his team were still unsure about the information that was trickling in from Afghanistan, but within days, they were transferred over. Among the dead SEALs from the Chinook was Dan, their SEAL platoon chief, meaning that Jim was the next senior enlisted of the platoon, and therefore bore the weight and responsibility of identifying their deceased comrades and helping the team work through their grief.
Literally within, it seemed like 30 or 45 minutes after getting there, they announced there's some Blackhawks coming in with body bags. They said, they're your guys. So we went out there, met the helicopters as they landed, and it was just 2 body bags right there. It was, we didn't know who at the time yet, but we rolled them into the morgue. The mortician, he's like, you guys stay out here for a minute. Let me get them prepped, that kind of thing. Because he wanted us to help ID him. So this is 4th of July, 28th June is when they got rolled up and got killed. So they've been out in open air for, 6 or 7 days at that point already. So it was Danny and Murph. I knew he had a Templar cross on his left arm. So we rolled up his sleeve and saw, sure enough, that was a Templar cross on his left arm. Then we went back to the compound where the team was at, and then probably within an hour, Marcus rolled around the corner.
As you may recall, Marcus was on the mountain at the beginning of the firefight and had been knocked unconscious partway during the gun battle after he saw 2 of his teammates killed.
He found some friendly Afghanis who pulled him in and tried to help him. The Taliban found that where he was at, and there was some kind of conflict there. They did get a hold of him, and they were going to cut his head off, essentially. They were going to kill him. But we were able to get in there and rescue him. And he came in and gave us all a hard hug. He was still bleeding from frag wounds from RPGs. And
Wow.
He only spent about a half hour with us, more or less, and kind of gave us a debrief of what happened on the mountain that he recollects, with that. And then they had to send him off to Germany to get healed, get surgeries and stuff like that, get fixed. Before we got there, the guys in the Chinook, the Marines had gone in and actually picked up everybody before we even got out there. But we had one guy missing. Matt was missing, yeah. So, and Marcus told us that he thought he was on the run because again, they split up at some point. We were actually getting some radio hits. We thought he was on the run, or it could have been a trap. We spent the next 2 weeks of dropping flyers, leaflets with little code thing on there. So if he is out there, we're trying to communicate with him if he's out on the run. In the meantime, as the only chief of the platoon, it was my duty to go through all the guys' gear that we lost. So I had to inventory all their personal and operational gear. One of those things where you really, it's important. You want to get it right and get everything there. So that was a tough job to do that during that time while we're trying to plan out a rescue operation, because right now it's considered a combat search and rescue. And then probably another week or so, there was a report that some local Afghani guys, they'd found Matt's body out there. So at least we had accountability. And so we went and got him too. And all this time I'm praying, I'm just praying, where's God in this thing? Because at the time, that was the worst tragedy in Naval Special Warfare history. We were worried they're going to send us back home because we wanted revenge. We want to get out there. We want to put some bullets in some heads. That was our mindset. We wanted to stay. So they did allow us to stay, but they pulled us out of the combat zone.
A few months later, their platoon's tour ended, but definitely not the way that any of them thought it would. They flew back to the United States, where lived the young widows and fatherless children and other family members of their 5 closest friends who died. But even in the darkest of times, Jim believes there was still purpose, and there were seeds, some that were planted and others that were watered.
We got everybody back, and after the incident, I hate to say we all kind of clammed up. So a lot of times guys are again, timid in sharing their feelings on this stuff, and unless it's in-house. And it's hard when we're not together much anymore, but I can't see how it hasn't affected them to see the finality of life. There's one that was right smack dab in front of us. It can happen like that. And, I prayed hard during this whole event. I prayed a lot of things, asking God for revenge. I asked God for a lot of things at this point, just to maintain and not crack up and not lose it for my guys, because I found the peace with them through this whole event. And I want that for the rest of my platoon as well.
Yeah.
You can share it. And I think they know, they knew I go to church, and they knew Matt went to church. fact, when I was going through his gear, Matt had a Bible, Murph had a Bible there. They say there's no atheists in foxholes, that kind of mindset. So that was one of the things that, because some of the guys weren't believers, but I like to think that with prayer that I had been doing, there's a seed planted.
Yeah.
Probably about 7 or 8 of us went on they called it the family trip. So this is 3 months after the incident happened. The Naval Special Warfare paid for us to pay our respects essentially to our guys. And so they flew us out from Hawaii to San Diego, and we, met with his family members, which I'll tell you what, that was tough too, because it's still raw for them too. But a lot of the family members who came up to us after that brought a lot of closure to them. Just for, even the funny stories, so that's what they like to hear the best, obviously. They want to hear the fond stories or the funny stories we had with their loved ones. And the idea is to keep the guys' memories alive, and so things like this help with that. So that's one of the things that I picked up on when we left Afghanistan, when we were at the USO there in the tarmac waiting for the plane. They had this mural. It was a picture. It was essentially like 3 soldiers on a mountain, but the sun was setting, so it was just silhouettes. All you could tell was the silhouettes of the guys. And on it had the caption says, Operation Enduring Freedom, live a life worthy of their sacrifice, that kind of thing, And I thought that was great, because I equated that almost immediately to live a life worth Christ's sacrifice. It was like, wow. So, but if you just put those two together, buddies and lost on the battlefield is one thing, but if you just take that raw emotion and feelings, that you have for your brothers, think about Christ, what he did, just for me, let alone anything else. It should be raw. It should be. When it is that raw, it's serious, every day I try to, before the kids even got out of the house, I tried to elicit that into but I want them to feel that. If they would just follow God's plan, and not everything's gonna be all right, but you'll come out of it. You come out of it scars, you come out of it with bruises and a lot of hurts in life, but you'll come out of it better.
As our conversation began to wind down, Jim wanted to share some closing thoughts.
God's been involved from the beginning, and I didn't know what I said or what I committed to when those girls led us to Christ. And I didn't know about that fire plug Navy chaplain, and he was just being real. And so God knew what it would take for me to absorb that, and to receive it. We're here on this earth for only a short amount of time. A lot of the times within the service, it's kind of natural because you're serving, right? You're serving something bigger than yourself, not only your country or your service, but you're serving, the guy next to you. I'm able to use story sometimes, a lot of times, to encourage, particularly men. Maybe had a seed in there, and if I watered it a little bit, and my part was to water a little bit or plant that little seed, then by how I acted or how I didn't act, that's all I guess, God's got me here for. So if I can do that, then I'm complete my mission.
Well, Jim, I appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing candidly with me. And I think it's really powerful.
Again, I appreciate being able to tell some of the story, particularly for the guys. And if it affects anybody in a positive way, or I think then that's part of that mission too.
Jim's story has a lot of themes running through it. Purpose, loss, grief. But perhaps the theme that stands out the most to me is seeds. God planted so many seeds in Jim's life, including that terrifying moment on the Navy salvage ship facing Russian attack helicopters, or the 2 YWAM girls on the beach in Hawaii, or the Navy chaplain during Jim's divorce, and of course, the seeds that God planted through Jim into the lives of his fellow team members and their families in the midst of tragedy, and the seeds that Jim is planting today as he shares his story with others. No matter what, no matter where, no moment is insignificant. And even today, moments after you stop listening to this podcast episode, you may be planting seeds in the life of someone else. So let's all be willing vessels to plant seeds wherever God sows. Today, Jim and his wife live in Virginia. He's retired from the Navy, but now serves in a civilian role as the Deputy Current Operations Officer for a Navy Special Operations Unit, which is a fancy way of saying that he helps facilitate Navy SEAL operations around the globe. If you want to see behind-the-scenes photos of Jim throughout his Navy career or of his team members from the Navy SEAL platoon, then just visit compelledpodcast.com and look up this episode. It's episode number 42 with Jim Payne. We'll also include some helpful links and resources, especially for veterans that are listening to this episode and have struggled with grief and loss. And if you know someone who would be encouraged by Jim's story, perhaps a veteran or someone who has lost a loved one in battle, then please send this to them. Again, it's episode number 42 with Jim Payne. It's our joy to release these stories for free, but that's only possible because of our sponsors and the generous financial support of our listeners like you. If you want to help us continue creating more stories just like Jim's, then consider joining Compelled as a monthly partner. You'll get access to all of our behind-the-scenes interviews with over 100 hours of additional interview content that we never had time to publish. And just as an example, my original interview with Jim was actually 3 hours long. And he has a ton of other cool stories that we didn't have time to include in our episode today, including how he met his wife, Sherry, which is a crazy cool story about how God brought them together. And of course, other war stories. And trust me, the story about him being bombed in Iraq while in a porta potty is unforgettable. So again, if you're a monthly partner, you'll get access to all of our full-length behind-the-scenes interviews, including Jim's. And you'll also get access to all of our new episodes 1 week early without ads. There's no set price. It's totally up to you. But most importantly, you're helping us create new episodes of Compelled. To join as a monthly partner or to make a one-time donation, just visit compelledpodcast.com/donate. Today's story was edited by Zach Thaler, Will Jackson, and Micah Foster. Script assistance from Mark Weber and sound engineering by Sonomorphic. Our associate producer is my persistent wife, Sarah Hastings, and I'm your host, Paul Hastings. You've been listening to Compelled. We'll be back next time with another compelling story. We'll see you then.